we get started, want to be mindful of everyone's time, Jackie's time, everyone else's time. So super excited to do this. This is called What's Next, Hybrid and Virtual Events in Higher Ed. It's something that Jackie and I talked a bit about a couple weeks or a month back or so. And I was thinking something that I'm talking to my team a lot about is what does this look like going forward? We all do have Zoom fatigue. We're in Zoom again. We're trying to spruce it up any different ways we can, but really, what's its value going forward? Because I believe, and Jackie too will talk about, there is a value of it going forward in some way. And what does hybrid actually mean? Because I feel like that's become the new buzzword. We've pivoted and we've done all these different things, and now we're thinking, what does hybrid actually look like? So we'll do talk about for like the next 30, 45 minutes. We'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. If you have any questions, drop in the Q&A. We'll get to it at the end for sure. But without further ado, here's what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about the shift in event strategy. This is something I think has actually been really exciting over the last year and a half. We are all content producers now. We can do it all ourselves. We can produce great, high quality content without anything more than our iPhone if we want. Trying to think about how do you continue to use virtual events to engage your audiences, in part because there is an expectation of virtual still. All of our research has shown that. And then what does hybrid mean? Like, how do we build them? What does it look like? And how do we actually utilize them? So I'm Matt Klingbeil. I'm the Director of Marketing at VisitDays. I'll let Jackie introduce herself.
Thanks, Matt. Hi, everyone. Jackie Hopkins here. I'm the Executive Director in Communications and Marketing at Drexel. Specifically, we have a department for Enrollment and Strategic Partnerships. And what that effectively means is I oversee the admissions events as well as our academic unit partnership, because as we all know, we cannot do the admissions event and marketing work alone. So we do it centrally, and then I work very closely with all of our academic units at Drexel for an integrated strategy there.
Cool. So I got to know Jackie a little bit almost a year ago, I guess, at this point. We kind of, talking about different products and everything. And I've always been struck by the work that her and her team do at Drexel, because they take it to the next level. They think about things from a marketing lens, and I say that as a compliment and as a marketer, thinking about how to do things a little bit differently, how to get your audience excited about an info session or a big event at a ballpark, like you just ran with your commencement, is really exciting to see how higher ed has been shifting and thinking about. So this is definitely stating the obvious, but for the last year and a half, everything has changed. All of our jobs have changed. Whether you're a first year campus visit coordinator or you're a VP of enrollment, or anything in between, our jobs have changed. But one of the coolest things I think that has taken place is that content and events now can start from the palm of our hands. That's not to say that it's going to replace everything. There's still nothing better than, to me, going to a concert and being in that environment. When I bought recently tickets to 3 concerts towards the end of the summer, I was so excited to be able to go back out and do that. But for us, as we think of enrollment, alumni, career, from the higher ed standpoint, we can now start building content that just meets our audiences right from the palm of our hands and their hands. User-generated content is super easy to create, super cheap to create also, which has been something that we've seen over and over again, which is always exciting to see the value of. You don't need to hire a filmmaker. You can do it, and it's great, but you can just take your iPhone and just start building out content right away. What have you seen with that, Jackie?
Yeah, so huge thing for Drexel this past year, living in the virtual world, is we finally gave in and created a TikTok. So Drexel has a pretty exciting, and the response to our TikTok account creation was impressive. So exactly to your point, Matt, about the work that we try to do, and all of our colleagues here on the webinar, is how do we differentiate, how do we create that excitement, especially in this chaos of the last year, where you were trying to engage and entice a 17, 18-year-old if you're doing undergrad specific work, but even on the graduate end, I do both actually, is how do you capture the attention? And we were so excited about getting our entire admissions team, our mascot, Mario the Dragon, involved on TikTok to tell a different story, to meet, especially the high school aged audience, our prospective student audience, where they are. And we were scared, we were nervous. We were like, there's so many risks here in terms of, just the level of how does it change the brand? Are we still keeping the level of sophistication and what Drexel is as a private R1 research institution, but how to make college still feel fun without sort of going off the rails. And it's exciting. And that was a huge piece for us in terms of the idea of content in the palm of your hands. In addition to that, we were having our student ambassadors all over campus doing tours from campus just on their phone. So we were allowing them to take over the story. They own that tour anyway when it was in person, let them own it in a virtual space. And so we were really excited. Those got really just fantastic engagement, lots of questions, personalization. I think that's one thing we'll talk a lot about in the next 30 minutes, is that virtual, while in a weird way, it should feel more transactional. A lot of our students, and the feedback we've seen in our surveys throughout the year with our virtual engagement and events, is that it felt more personal than being on campus at a large open house or at a large accepted or admitted students day. And so, yeah, we took advantage of those two things I'll mention that were exciting for us with content in the palm of your hand.
And I love meet them where they are, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but that's been the one thing that has just fundamentally changed, right? If I'm going to school virtual, or I have a job, especially I'm a prospective grad student, I think about my experiences going to grad school and applying for grad schools, working full time. I don't have time to go to a 6 p.m. open house or info session. Like, I need something to be met in the car, on the train, something like that. And that's really what's something that I think is very positive that's come out of the last year and a half. So virtual content, right? We could be tired of it. Some of us think it might be great. A betting man, I would say almost everyone on this webinar is probably saying, I'm tired of this, Matt. Like, I don't want to hear about it anymore. But I would say that there are at least two very positive things going forward about virtual content. One is we could use that as a lead in to in-person events. I was telling Jackie before we came on that I think back to my time, and I was kind of polling our VisitDays team about this. What was your experience like when you were looking for colleges way back when? I think it was like 15 years ago now for me. And I was thinking, it's an awkward kid in high school. I didn't know what I wanted to do, where I wanted to go. I didn't want to go too far from where am I looking? And I think back now, especially now as we come out of the pandemic and kind of through the other side a little bit, this is a great lead into in-person, where the virtual content lowers that temperature a little bit, and allows me to interact with Jackie and interact with the team and start to understand if Drexel or any institution is a good fit for me, and then know the next week I can go in person and actually feel the campus, which is so important. And I'm going to actually talk about this right now too, before we talk about the travel anywhere idea. It creates a lot more access to get students to come interact with you. So you talk about that a little bit, Jackie?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so I know, as all of us are thinking through, what's next, and to Matt's point about the opportunity rather than, I think, the obstacle of, oh my gosh, now everybody is going to want to be back on campuses. They're not going to want to be on Zoom. They're going to be frustrated by it. But really, it's how do you marry the two, and how do you find that balance? Because truly the access expectation is still there. Like, we're already hearing it, even though, some of our virtual event attendance declined towards the end once we started having on-campus visits and tours again in the spring and summer. We still have this sense that the access is the expectation of having a connection that is more instantaneous. And so, to Matt's point about being a lead-in, we've seen that all the content we built over the last year, tons of recordings from sessions, from events, some high quality we did with vendors, some we did more in-house, and we've surfaced it, right? We've kept it on those pages where they will register for in-person events, because we want them not to give it all away up front, but we want them to engage in the content. And we're still promoting our one-on-one chats on a daily basis with our admissions officers, right? We're still using VisitDays for key programs so that they can have meetings with different constituents on campus. We're still allowing folks to connect so that, to Matt's point, it sort of breaks the ice a little bit. And so, especially for a high school student who's like, oh my gosh, I haven't even talked to a human that's not my family in 18 months, let alone wanting to market myself to a college. And how do I do that when I haven't had a regular college search process? And even for these rising seniors and juniors, while they might have felt like, oh, I didn't lose out too much, I'll still get my senior year, they would have had this whole spring in a normal world. And so, yeah, we've really found that those one-on-one counseling sessions virtually allow that, kind of figure out, okay, maybe I'll get my silly questions that they think are silly, which aren't though, out first, right? And then when I get there, I'll be able to take it seriously. And truly, for better or worse, it might be mom, dad, grandparent, guardian, whoever that's pushing them to be like, go look at what's happening there. Make sure you know what you know. Whereas in years past, they would have found tons of PDF publications, right? They would have had to read through all these things. Now they can just be like, oh, look, I can just schedule a quick virtual information session. Ours happened to include a quick virtual tour, which is, PowerPoint of images of campus. It's not a full virtual tour like I mentioned on the phone, but they can at least get their feet wet and be like, okay, cool. I feel like I know Drexel. When I get on campus, maybe I'll take more advantage. Mom and dad or grandma and grandpa will be impressed, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's definitely a real thing in terms of the lead-in opportunity, and seeing it as an opportunity and not an obstacle.
Yeah. And I think the other piece for sure is that it allows you to travel anywhere, right? Virtual content really does allow you to engage with your audience anytime, anywhere. And most importantly, I think at their own leisure also. So can you talk a little bit about that, Jackie?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one thing that I'll say and my role specifically, as I mentioned, is mostly used to be on campus events, but like Matt talked about, all of our jobs changed. And so I work really closely with our specific admissions team who are recruiting and traveling. And VisitDays is how, they introduced me to VisitDays actually as the event platform, because they were using it for the NACAC college fairs virtually. And so it's important in this context, I think, for everyone to understand that not only the idea of like travel for recruitment, that's changed the game. Our Drexel has had so much more ability to connect with audiences that we might not have visited those high schools before. We might not have had that opportunity. So I think everyone knows that, of course, just the natural barriers that were broken. But on the flip side of that is really knowing that the audiences that we sometimes did, you've had to invest tons of money to travel internationally. And now we know that we can reach that international audience in a much easier way, in a much more cost-effective way, and in a way that truthfully what we've seen has made them more comfortable. Because oftentimes I think there are, granted, of course, it's wonderful to like meet your recruiter for India, or if you're recruiting in Europe or Africa, but knowing that they have the opportunity to connect. And our admissions team, our international specific recruiters, they were on VisitDays on Zoom at 2 a.m. to be able to, and we adjusted our expectations, we adjusted our schedules to, again, meet them where they are. And so that's something that for us, VisitDays helped us to be able to not only have the meetings, and then of course, from my lens, the multitude of events we were able to plan, but knowing that the content of having information sessions, having meetings available, just having more accessibility, allowing us to connect with them, whether it's live or not. I think I mentioned too, just having our content regularly available, and it's not just your standard, oh, well, you need to do more, like fill out an information form and we'll mail you a packet. No, now it's, hey, how can I get my hands on what I want to know, or access that individual who can help answer my questions? And I think for better or worse, like that's the new expectation. And so we're trying to meet it the best we can.
Yeah, and I think the proof is kind of in the data at this point, at least. So, I mean, I was telling Jackie earlier that, our research and our polling has shown that 93% of students who have gone through VisitDays events that institutions have run, NACACs have run, everyone else has run, 93% of them said they had a good time going through that process. Not to say like we're the end all be all, but to say that virtual is something that if you're doing these sorts of things that are in other industries kind of expected, and we're bringing it to higher ed now in a lot of different ways, the students react well to it. So how do we engage our audience with virtual content? And this is tough, right? Like we know this is a tough thing to do. I've struggled with it with our own marketing content at times, but I think there's two things. And first question is, can I get my campus partners and my team to build this content? And then will it fit in my hand? So when we think about user-generated content, that's where we talk about using your phone. Like Jackie and her team taking their phones and doing a campus tour, that really is user-generated content. It's generally free content, and it's super, super authentic, where you're able to get alumni and other people on campus and your current students who are your best marketers and spokespeople to actually talk about this. How else have you guys engaged with some sort of user-generated content?
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. So I think one thing that comes to mind specifically that I was excited about is when it fits right in line with the conversation about access and the things that sometimes people don't get access to even when they're on campus. And so one thing we, pre-COVID would always try to get families into a residence hall, right? Of course, it's critical for them. They want to be able to see where their students living. They're sending their child away to us, and they have to make sure they're going to be taken care of. And so we actually were able to have some of our admissions team members go into res halls that were not accessible regularly by students because of COVID and health and safety restrictions. We were able to get the opportunity for them to go in and have IG Live. And so they did IG Live tours, Instagram Live, for them, I'm sure everyone knows, but Instagram Live tours of our res halls throughout the yield season this past spring. And for us, that was pretty huge because not only did it give, especially an international student who never would have seen that ever, because they weren't visiting campuses even pre-COVID because it just was a barrier for them to be able to come. And so that was something that for us was really like leaning in to, and what we specifically did on our end is, you know, one thing I'd recommend for everyone to think about is, especially during the times throughout the last year when we've all been a little bit backed into the corner of like, we have to keep thinking about new ideas. And Matt, you mentioned it, like talking to the team about new exciting content. How are we generating it? How are we serving it up? We went to our sources, you know, granted the students weren't always available. They weren't allowed in the hall. So we went to our admissions folks who are alum because they used to live in those rooms. Like thankfully we have a nice cohort of recent Drexel alum who are on our admissions team. And, you know, there's the second to our students, they're the next best marketers. I mean, obviously they're our trained admissions professionals. But yeah, so that was one that we were really excited about. Another example, I think, of some of the user generated content that we've really seen land is alumni spotlights. And so some of that, like you mentioned, alumni Matt. And so trying to, you know, in a normal world, I know no one wants to hear that word anymore, that phrase anymore. We would try to engage alumni on the road with travel for our admissions staff, for, you know, my team specifically on the communications, marketing, and events, always doing testimonials, things like that. But we feature, you know, alumni typically in our events on campus. And so we said, let's make sure we're allowing those alum to connect with this was specifically during yield, connect with our admitted audience. And because that is the story, and having them be able to show their own visuals around where they have been since Drexel and tell that story. And so that was exciting because we had done not only, of course, featuring them in our virtual events, but then also allowed them we did a couple examples with social media posts, having them give us quotes around like, what is it, you know, what does it truly mean to be a Drexel dragon? And from a fun standpoint, from a philosophical standpoint. And it was exciting to see that they just really jumped on the opportunity to say, hey, you know what, I want our future students to hear from, you know, those who have come before. And I know that seems like a pretty natural thing that we all tap our alumni audiences, but during the year of virtual life, they were even more eager and excited to do it because it was accessible for them too. And so it was a lot easier for the user to engage from that specific resource from alumni, because they were like, oh, you don't need me to come to campus. Like, this actually isn't as big of an ask. Like, I can make that work, and I want to make that work. And so that was, for us, I think, two examples of things that worked well, that landed well, and that, you know, hopefully we've learned a lot, that how do we continue to make sure these campus partners and these constituent groups are not being forgotten about as we continue doing virtual content programming.
That's great. And then the other piece of it is, how does this fit in my hand? And Jackie's talked a lot about this. I'm not going to ask her to repeat it, but she talked about TikTok. She talked about the virtual campus tours through the lens of the tour guide, which is tremendous to think about. I would just add that all this content, whether it's live or whether it's this on-demand content that you're going to record, to make sure that your students, your constituents can come back anytime, day or night, to engage with you, that they can do it from their phone if they want. That when they're on the train, they're stuck in traffic, they're walking down the street, walking the dog, that if they're trying to get questions answered, they can do that just from their phone by pulling it out. As if they're going to check their Instagram feed, they can engage with that content as another way to continually drive that engagement. So what's this next frontier? This is like this kind of concept cracks me up a little bit because it's so interesting of an idea. We went from all of us.
That's such a buzzword, the hybrid, but yeah.
It is. No, it's the new normal, the hybrid. It's all so buzzy. And as marketers, the buzzwords drive us crazy a lot of times. But there's something really interesting here, because we went from everything had to be in person. You had to show up 15 minutes early. fill out your forms, even if it's a doctor's appointment, everything had to be done on time and promptly. Then we go to virtual only, where it's, I'm going to show up, but if I don't, there's really no consequence anymore. And I can do it with my sweatpants, or I can do it in shorts. It doesn't really matter anymore. To now saying, how do we kind of marry the two together to still create new experiences? And it's could be scary. It's a lot of question marks, right? But we're going to try to do our best to give the way we've been thinking about this. I know my team, our engineers, our product team, the marketing team here, we're thinking a lot about it. I know every university in the country is thinking a lot about this going forward, especially as Jackie is in a major city. There's going to be some other pull and push where you're going to have different things out of your control. You can't always have everyone on campus for a while.
Exactly.
So what is a hybrid event? This is a definition kind of I was thinking about. I'd love to see Jackie's kind of thought on this as well. To me, it's combining the best part of virtual and in-person to reach an even larger audience. I was talking to someone a couple of weeks ago. They said they used to run this conference in person, and they would get 2,000 people to show up every year, typical Hilton, Hyatt lobby, 2,000 people. And they pivoted to virtual this year. They reached 4,500 people. So they more than doubled their attendance for that conference. So their question to me was, how do we make sure we can keep that up and have both in person and virtual? So what are your thoughts on that, Jackie?
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. So, for us, and we talked about it a little bit already, is there's an interesting, maybe like two schools of thought, but then there's one in the middle that is sort of where I live, right? Is that I think a lot of folks are like feeling that the Zoom fatigue means that maybe for now in summer and fall, we ease off the virtual because people are so exhausted. And then other school thought that's like, no, just keep offering as much virtual as you were, because if you reduce, then they're going to feel like, oh, I don't have access. So I'm in the middle, right? So I'm someone who's like, we have to continue it. We already talked about access, the expectation of access. And really knowing, to your point here, is that combining the best parts is key, right? So for us, we have our open houses that are coming up, and we have already talked very openly. We're already working with RAV vendors to talk about the idea of, let's not serve everything up streaming. We don't need to stream everything. Like we're having guests back on campus. We're so excited about it, but we don't need to stream every single session. Some of that content is easily accessible because of everything, like I mentioned, we've already developed and or filmed over the past year. And so let's just really be thoughtful around what are going to be the most enticing and engaging sessions to stream. And that's, to me, the perfect example of really taking the best parts of both worlds, and knowing too that I think there's for a lot of folks, it's the stress and the pressure of the idea that hybrid means doubling all efforts, include not only like just staffing, right? Because then it's like, well, if I'm hybrid, I'm going to have our staff in person and then staff online for those that are at home, but then also doubling budget potentially, right? So like, all right, I have my on-site event costs or visit costs or whatever they may be, but then I'm going to also have to pay for an additional streaming, webcasting, and whatever I'm doing there. And so for us, we're really trying to find a balance right now. And we'll get into it in a second, so I don't want to give it all away, of what that looks like. And we understand it's a concern for anyone in the industry right now. And so we're really thinking through, like I said, being very strategic and thoughtful about what we are investing in for a hybrid event, and what creates, how do we still set expectations around a hybrid event being engaging, but not giving it all away.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the short question is, can we do it? And the answer is yes, we can. Like, we really can do this. And I think there are some more creative, unique experience like you're talking about. I was talking to one customer, and what they're going to wind up doing, they have a big nursing program. So what they're going to do is a hybrid clinical, essentially, like a experiment kind of thing, a demonstration where they'll have 5 or 10 people in that area where they're going to do this demonstration, and they're going to live stream it. And I was talking about the way they're going to do that is they're going to set up an iPhone on a tripod and live stream it through Zoom that way through it. Yeah. So then you can do low cost, good quality still, as long as the Wi-Fi is working, everything's working, but you're able to have those two experiences and kind of have this interesting play of questions being asked in person and virtually being answered by the professor or whoever's running that session at that point, which is a pretty interesting thing to start experiencing. It means I don't have to go 9 a.m. on Saturday to campus. I can do that from home, go next week if I'm free instead.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it hits kind of perfectly into some of these items, and I'll get into them more in a second, is like the idea of certain audiences wanting certain things. And so like a nursing audience wanting to feel like efficiency, like that's a natural behavior of someone looking in that field.
Of course.
And like, oh, okay, I want to make sure, to your exact point, like that I'm not having to like rearrange my schedule, and that I can get access to something, whether I can do it in person, great, and I want to feel and have a tangible experience there of a clinical, or I can be able to capture that and still get the same impact, which is
and I think that's the future, is a mix of everything in a sense, right? But really virtual and hybrid for the short-term immediate future is going to be, that's the future. I don't think everyone's comfortable yet doing 2,000 people on campus for an open house yet. We're going to get there, but to have a mix of the two in a lot of ways is kind of this future that people are expecting. So providing as many opportunities as possible for engagement. We were talking about this, people do expect some sort of virtual option. And it might be like hybrid, that might not be for everything. We're going to take our foot off that gas a little bit, but the expectation that I could still join from my couch if I need to, or I can still join on the subway if I need to. Those options are expected. I don't think that's going to go away. What do you think?
I agree. And I think exactly, Matt, to what I was mentioning earlier about being in that middle of those two schools of thought, is I keep hearing and speaking with families, and obviously with our internal team, both our direct admissions team and our communications and marketing team in Drexel's admissions, is really that folks have to recognize that some people, while yes, the families and some of us, certain, maybe even generationally, some folks are like, oh, life just has to go back to normal. Ignore this code, like this is over. We need to move on. And that there are still, and I think you mentioned it, Matt, people that are not going to feel 100% comfortable with that. And so we have to find opportunity that we aren't leaving those folks behind, especially when you think about, for us in Philadelphia, that there's still, and have always been some access concerns for our first gen and low income students in the Philadelphia area. How do we make sure that they're getting opportunities to do it on their phone? Because truthfully, like laptops have been a challenge. And when we've had, when we've been developing websites and even working with VisitDays, like one of the huge benefits for us was the mobile optimization, because yes, and certainly no matter what demographic or background, you may not always have a cell phone, but most folks do, and they don't always have the laptop or the internet connection. Whereas, you get the free Wi-Fi, do what you need to do on your cell phone. And so we're always really thinking as much as we can about the different audiences and their expectations. And sometimes they don't even know what they want or need. And so if we can have the flexibility, and not saying we don't have unlimited budget, I know no one on this call does. So how do we really think thoughtfully around, there are going to be certain groups, especially, and I think it's on my next slide, talking about undergrad versus grad versus transfer, like specific within the undergrad pool, where you have to think thoughtfully around how you're deciding where to continue virtual, to make it hybrid, because we've actually learned throughout the year that some audiences, it's been far more successful purely virtual. And we've actually seen with certain groups that because of, for example, we have, just going off the nursing example you shared, we have the accelerated nursing program, which is a career change program that once you have a bachelor's degree and you go in, and that group, because they're from all over the world, I mentioned efficiency, they're future nurses, and they've also already been through a bachelor's or been through a career, so they're ready to get the information at an instant and get ready to get into this next phase of their life. And so virtual's been immensely successful for that audience.
And I would just pick on the one thing you said, mobile optimization. So we have seen 70% of attendees of virtual events are going through a smartphone of some sort. And in part because you can really get that access to anywhere as long as it's a smartphone, and a couple in different sense.
Absolutely.
So offer plus assess hybrid, augment with virtual. Let's talk a little bit about that, Jackie.
Yeah, so I wanted to throw this out because I know for a lot of folks, and this is something Matt and I have been talking about, it can feel like daunting to then having had our life pre-COVID, right, of events and travel and admissions world, and then having to pivot that 100% the last year, and then the feeling of having to pivot again, to be like, oh wait, now I have to do it completely differently again. And I want to mention that we don't think that, right? So I don't, and I think Matt's wonderful. Yeah. I agree with Matt. Like we can do it. Like we can. And so some thoughts of like how to make it scalable, realistic. And that's the most important part is being able to think about offering these hybrid programs. As I mentioned, our upcoming open houses, what we're choosing to stream is really content that would be difficult for people to find by just searching on our website. And so we want to be able to give them that live, still again virtual, but live virtual experience. And we'll be using VisitDays to stream our sessions that are most engaging and something that you want to make sure that they're really capturing in the moment and not having to read about or figure out on their own on our website. But then we'll continue to assess, because for us, we may then shift that to maybe during open houses, it's just having virtual meetings in VisitDays and not having actual sessions. Maybe it's just that you can connect because maybe we had a financial aid session and then you want to connect with the financial aid office right after and you couldn't come to campus. And so you could potentially still watch an information session that we have recorded and then have the opportunity to connect and really get your personal questions answered, because that topic is more personal than learning generally about just the application process. And so those are some things we're really thinking about and being strategic, especially for our budget planning. No one's giving us double the money to say you can live stream every single session at every on-campus event while you still have to worry about catering, parking, facilities set up, and all of anyone specifically in the events world, you get that. And so we're being really thoughtful around testing and assessing. And that's really what we did this whole past year. So no one's a stranger to that. Is sort of like, let's try something new. Let's think outside the box. And so I only say this to hopefully let folks know that I get it. We're all fatigued and I think exhausted, but it's not completely reinventing the wheel. It's just modifying what we've learned. And I think for me, that's why I say augment with virtual, right? So you're going to get back to Matt's point, like you're going to get back to your open houses and your admitted student stays, and we're already been doing our sessions and tours, and we're getting back to all that. And just know that it doesn't have to be pre-COVID, COVID. There is a marriage to what your strategy and what your offerings are. And that's really what we're focused on at Drexel. And I encourage other folks to really have those conversations with your leadership, with your teams, especially with your ambassadors, that it's not just duplicating work for the sake of like, oh, we have to keep doing more without any return. It's really about augmenting what you do well and what you do well, and then keeping the access, because that's the part that people, to Matt's point, and what we've been talking about, they still expect it because it was our way of life for 18 months. It wasn't just like a blip on the map of like, oh, we had a little bit of moment there. And so I mentioned here just that strategy of like doing it certain times of year. So as I mentioned, like we'll offer it, especially in this transition period where, Matt said it best, like right now in the immediate future, people are still expecting virtual in this hybrid phase. And so we're going to know like when to say, okay, we're doing streaming these open house sessions. We're still offering virtual information sessions and tours on a weekly basis for the next year. Those aren't going away. Like they'll be available to people, even though you can't come to campus. As I mentioned, international students from West Coast for Drexel and Philadelphia, they're still going to want to have that option and that access. And then tailoring by audience. So we already kind of covered that, is the idea that certain groups, it's not going to be one size fits all. And so thinking strategically and thoughtfully with your teams, with you really leveraging your experts, like working with, if it's the transfer team or if it's for graduate students, for example, like we know for our graduate programming, that virtual space worked really well for working professionals with kids. And so we have to think about what that looks like. And so certain populations, like I already mentioned, international, et cetera, they only have access. And so you can't just make the virtual and even this new hybrid an afterthought. It's a matter of just building it into your planning, building it into your strategy, and not feeling like so daunted because you've already done both, right? We've done pre-COVID, we've done all the events. And how do you balance it? So I want to say that I of course have like that, and my own anxiety of like, oh my gosh, what's this next year going to look like? But on the flip side, I think, oh, okay, we're not doubling the work. We're creating efficiencies.
Yeah.
And we may get rid of some events we used to do on campus because now they're better suited virtually.
Yeah.
And so that's
We've all done so much work in the last 18 months. Now it really is about tinkering and making everything better because we've done that work already. We don't have to do it again. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to throw this out there for folks, that especially when we talk about audience, and I know I forgot about this slide, so I'm glad you kept going. And yeah, so this is just an example of audience specific. Our transfer students, we typically host virtual events, or just in general, we host specific yield events for them, I should say, and they were virtual this year. But we've really learned that for those individuals who are, again, have been through the college search process, now they're trying to find the right fit. They want a little bit more of instantaneous, like, just tell me what I have to do. I want to get, I think Drexel's the right place. I want to get to Drexel. And so we've been able to really tailor a lot of great programming using VisitDays to this audience, because they don't always need all the fluff. And I don't want to say that is a full, that's not a generalization. Some traditional transfer students may have only been at an institution for 4 or 5 months. And of course, as they're transferring, they're still first year students. But some transfer students, and what we see a lot of, is they're like, I've been at a community college for 2 years, and now I'm ready to just like get me the information I need. And I'm working, I'm working at night, and I'm
Right.
not available. And Matt said it best, like, sometimes you just can't always be available to get to campus for an evening information session. And so this is just an example of some things that we've done. These are our virtual admitted students days for transfer students specifically. And it's, for us, again, we're going to be using VisitDays in a lot of ways. I already mentioned our streaming, some of our virtual open houses too.
I love the idea of almost like hyper segmenting now, really knowing every kind of constituency, and even a more granular, just personalized way, essentially.
Exactly. And it allows us to do it. Now we have options.
Yeah. So if anyone has any questions, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen for a second. If anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them in here. Jackie and I will hang around for another minute or so and answer any of those questions. If no one has any questions they want to drop in here right now, what I will do is put back up our contact information.
Don't be shy. I know we threw a lot out at you, but
there's a lot of information. This is kind of like, we both can talk for hours and hours about, really, especially things like this.
yeah.
So if I don't want to make anyone feel like they have to be on the spot here, but I will say we're both here as a resource. I know Jackie is more than willing as well.
Absolutely.
Here's our email addresses. Here's more information about VisitDays. The community page that we have, this will be uploaded over the next couple of days as a webinar, so you can go back and watch and do what you want with it. But reach out to us. Let us know. If we don't know the answer, I'm more than happy to put you in touch with the right person that knows the answer as well, about hybrid, in person, virtual, just anything. The goal here is to try to make your jobs easier, honestly. So we're here to do that for you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And one thing I note too, thank you so much, Matt, for inviting me to do this. We're learning every day. And then for us, and for me especially, I don't want anyone out there that has joined us to feel like, oh, well, you don't want to share secrets. For us, it's really about, like, we've all been through a pretty traumatic year. And as professionals in higher education and in the education world, at the end of the day, it's about best serving our students and our audiences. And so, VisitDays has been an amazing partner in that. I hope all of you, if you haven't already considered it, if you're, you may, I think most people probably already have it if they're on this, but if not, definitely let us know, because there's opportunity to, I think, like I said, continue to improve and enhance and not feel as so bogged down by the constant changes of the last year. And so we're here to help. And like I said, I'm not going to be giving everybody all the Drexel insight
of course
all the time, but I'm happy to kind of talk through what we've done and what we've learned, and we're equally open to suggestions, because we're still learning every day.
Yeah. Here's a question for you, actually, Jack, before we hop off, is, were you able to host virtual events with alumni? And if so, what was the strategy behind them, if you knew? Or
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So Jennifer, I'm just, maybe to clarify, do you mean the alumni being the audience, or just having alumni support at an event for, like, prospective students? Because I'm just from the admission side. Perfect, awesome. Absolutely. So yeah, definitely. So we work really closely with our alumni relations office. And so what we did for a couple different instances, actually, for our grad virtual open house, for some of our admitted student days that we did smaller scale, what we called academic deep dives by college during yield for admitted students. And so we worked closely with alumni relations to encourage that. We made them topical so that the alumni were more like inclined to say, I do want to do that. And we know that we were all feeling it by the end of April, that we're like, no more. And so trying to get volunteer support from any office became a little bit of a struggle, and we had to keep reminding and remotivating. So what we did was we said, okay, well, this is specific to your college. Like, you were a business student. This is an event that we'd love to have your insight, because, this is what you can speak to. It's not just random Drexel that not that they don't love Drexel, but I think the best way for us was to really host specific and work with our colleges and schools. And we liaised with the alumni office to say, who are your best people, who's going to translate well online. And that worked well for us because they would do alumni panels, alumni in Zoom, of course, alumni spotlights. And then what we are doing right now, actually, for anti-melt, is we do virtual meetups regionally. And so that's another specific tailoring so that an alum may feel more connected, because we're actually, for our incoming students across the country, we have alum who are hosting virtual meetups just to talk about Drexel and say, hey, you're from Florida. That's where I went. I came to Drexel from Florida. Like, let's talk about what that experience was like. So hopefully that's helpful, Jennifer, for some things we've been doing.
Cool. More hyper personalization, which is just so key still.
Yeah, we're just
awesome.
Thankful we have the support from those offices and campus partners to do it.
Awesome. Well, I want to be conscious of everyone's time again. So Jackie, again, thank you for being a part of this. And for everyone else who joined, thank you very much. We'll get this recording out to you, and hope everyone has a great day.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks, Matt.
Bye, Jackie.
Bye.